Hello, everyone. I am Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspired podcast, and my guest today is Evelyn Rysdyk. Once described as part storyteller, part minister, part scientist, and part fairy godmother, Evelyn is the author of several noted books on shamanism, including The Norse Shaman, Spirit Walking, A Course in Shamanic Power, A Spirit Walker's Guide to Shamanic Tools, The Nepalese Shamanic Path, and Shamanic Creativity. Along with her writings, Evelyn is an impassioned shamanic teacher and storyteller with over 30 years of experience working with people who are eager to grow and experience their true power. She has been a featured instructor for the Shift Network for Sounds True and other online teaching venues. She's the founder of the Spirit Passages Academy and the New Humans, New Earth Summit. Whether through face-to-face contact with individual clients, workshop groups, and online participants, or through the printed world, Evelyn uses her loving humor and passion to open people's hearts, expand their awareness, and inspire them to live more joyful, fulfilling, and purposeful lives. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This
So
is wonderful.
it's quite interesting. I'd like to know how, I mean, during our discussion, we are going to talk about the most ancient form of spirituality, the shamanism. And how one starts in Manhattan, New York, and ends up with ancient Norse language, Scandinavian traditions, and morphs into a shamanic teacher. What was the draw?
Actually, it was an extreme depression. I realized during an extreme depression, I had been dysthymic, which is a chronic low-level depression for most of my life. But I basically, the wheels came off the cart and I went into psychotherapy and I had to have some kind of medication to help me sleep. This is the pre-Prozac days. And as a frankly stubborn person and somebody who likes to try to figure it out herself, I said, there must be some way I can move this process forward. So at the time, there was a place in New York City. I'm from Lower New York, which the more excited I get, the more you'll hear that accent. They have a great big catalog. Back then, it was paper catalogs of all the things that you could sign up for that would improve your life. So I narrowed it down to a couple, and one of them was The Way of the Shaman with Michael Horner. And I had read his book when it was a little paperback. And when it first came out, and I think I read it in 1981, something around there. And I thought, well, I read that book, which sounded interesting. Let me try that. So I wound up taking that course. And if you've ever been depressed, I describe it as being like the horse that pulls a cart, where they put the blinders on the side of their eyes so they can only see the path ahead. It felt like that in my body, that my vision, both metaphoric and visual, it feels sort of narrowed to this much more limited experience of life. So I attend this course. There are 150 people lying on the floor, sitting on the floor. They don't lie down till later. And I thought, oh, okay, this is weird, but let me do this. And Michael was a wonderful storyteller, and he told all different stories, and he was speaking with us for probably half the first day. But we finally got down to do a journey. And now there are 150 people lying on the floor, including me, with a blindfold on. And I had the experience, a very visceral experience of opening up in that first journey. This is a real sense of my whole being, like opening up, like a flower, or a bigger metaphor than that, perhaps, and meeting a power animal at the same time. And I said, whatever this is, I am feeling better right now than I have felt for a long time. So I started training with them. And over the course of the years, I've trained with shamans from around the world. And that experience of that shift, and anybody who's been depressed knows it's not just a mental condition, but it's a physical condition, it's a spiritual condition. And all of that was lifted off of me. And I felt that opening up on so many different levels that I I realized that whatever this ancient method is, it's like a key to locks inside of us. That's the best way to describe it. It's like something came in and opened up a box that had been locked shut. And over the course of more time, I learned more about it. But that's how I began.
Interesting. For me, sometimes I feel like there is a missing link. All the connectivity is there, and I've been feeling this for many, many years, but it's just one link, one contact, which is not fully soldered in place in order to activate my full potential. And if I may ask, is the bear your spirit animal?
Yes, you can tell, can't you? Was originally trained as an artist, and when I moved to Maine, there was someone who couldn't afford to work with us, and she was a silversmith, so I traded lessons. So that was a piece I made with a claw from an old rug. So
nice. And do you have any other power animal, or the bear is the only one? And
that's my primary. I have the equivalent of the San Diego Zoo, honestly. When I'm traveling, I have little mice that make sure that the luggage gets wherever we're going at the same time we're there. We have our transportation buddies, our three wolves that ride on top of the car or on top of the bus or the airplane or whatever it is we're traveling in. And others, the blue heron, which reminds me, just chill. Everything's going to be fine on this. Just let it go. Let it go. I've got this. And of course, I have human form teachers as well. And that aspect of it is also a blessing, because you have this sense of kind of multidimensional relationships. We have relationships in the physical world. We have relationships then with spirits, and then that sort of fits together. You have these spiritual partnerships that come in and embrace the physical world, and then your physical relationships also tend to intertwine on that spiritual level. And to me, that's kind of a more expansive way of interacting, certainly, but also of being connected with not only individuals, but also the natural world. It's like, again, you talked about that key, and I don't think it's the same key for everyone, but that key has helped me in the early part of my life and continues to bear fruit. I'm by nature a fairly concrete person, which seems very odd for somebody whose lifestyle is all spiritual at this point. And I think it's important to have fruits of some kind in a process along the way, to observable fruits as part of the process. And what I love about the interplay between the shamanic experience of life and the physical experience of life is they continue to bear fruit. You get support for whatever it is that's going on in your life, and you in turn are in relationship with them and offer them what it is they require. So you are in this wonderful dance where the visible world is interacting and supporting the non-visible world, and vice versa. So it becomes a kind of almost electric feeling in my body that you are connected on all these different levels. And it's not that we weren't connected on all those levels before, but being conscious of those connections and being able to interact on all those levels is just delicious.
Yes, and from what I gather from all my guests and all these interviews is that sometimes, or pretty much most of the time, the invisible world is much more interesting, much more dynamic. They have the awareness of who they are on the other side than us, which are bound by social structures, dogmas, religious beliefs, a job, bills, and we forget to live, and we just go to work to pay the bills, and we are not aware of who we are and how we should live our lives. But the other side, again, as I said, is much more dynamic and interesting.
It's interesting to me that shamanism kind of came back. This is 100 to anywhere from 60 to 100,000 year old tradition, a spiritual way of interacting in the world to solve ordinary problems. You know, our hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't do stuff just to have fun. They were engaged in survival. And this process arose again in our culture at a time that coincided with the beginnings of the environmental movement, and at a time when there was this interesting dichotomy between awakening and kind of reactionary behavior that was that considered change a thing to fear. And that timing is not accidental, I don't think. You know, I think our ancestors are always tapping us on the shoulder. Excuse me, you missed something. This tool has the capacity not just to give us information and guidance and healing from the spiritual world, it has the ability to change us. And I didn't realize this, that this was a thing, you know, until I experienced it in my own being. As I said, I was originally trained as an artist, as a creative. And suddenly I found that I was more engaged with different kinds of creativity. I stepped from the visual world into writing, for instance. And I was the kid that couldn't spell in grade school, by the way. And that, you know, like, where did that come from? And not until probably 20 years later, I see research that because, particularly journeying with a repetitive sound or repetitive action of some kind, it engages the brain in a very different way. When you're journeying to some kind of repetitive rhythm, whether it be you're dancing to a rhythm or drumming or singing, chanting to a rhythm, it engages alpha states, theta states, delta states, and gamma simultaneously. Now, I'm going to glance down at my notes, so if you see my eyes go down. The alpha states are what we call mystical states of consciousness. And the part of our brain that we used to refer to as right brain activity gets engaged. That part that is less linear and less worried about the bills, as you say. The theta state is that feeling of connection to everything. When you're in that theta wave state, you feel not as an isolated individual, but part of something universal. Delta is this extraordinary capability of feeling like plugged in somehow, that you're plugged in. So you've got intuition going with theta. You've got these mystical states of consciousness in alpha. But gamma is the thing that sets your brain and body into an optimal state, particularly your brain. It's like everything is on. And that gives you also heightened compassion, heightened positive emotions, and also heightened perception, which I think of as kind of returning on, uncivilizing us for a little bit and allowing our instinctual, sensitive self to become present. So that exercise of the brain in that way, you may have gone on a journey for a specific reason to, you know, receive healing, find out some hidden information, whenever it might be. But while you're doing that, you're actually getting a systems upgrade. And the more you do it, the more those system upgrades become permanent parts of you. Now, I find that fascinating, that the very thing that we need to take a leap of evolution. We know also that we're wired for transcendence. We have the capability, that's a Joseph Chilton Pearce comment, we are wired for transcendence. We have receptors in our brains for things like mescaline-like compounds. We're designed for having extraordinary experience. And it is, I think, for a reason. It's not just to have an expanded experience and go, oh, wasn't that cool? I think it's part of the strategy for organisms to evolve. When we have different kinds of receptors inside of us, it's as if our own biology is saying, this is the path you need to take. And in the place that we are now, and I don't know how miserable it is in Canada right now, but here it seems we are more divided than we have ever been, and in a frantic, low brain kind of way, as if people are operating from that fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And when people are in that state, they cannot communicate with one another. They cannot find a bridge between their two ideas, their two worldviews. And that is not going to help us collaborate with nature. We have to be able to pull ourselves together as an enormous collective. Now we're well over 8 billion. Pull ourselves together into at least a collective that can work together. We may not always agree on everything, nor should we, but we have to find bridges using our imagination, using our some of the capabilities, like the journey process improves intuition and imagination. So imagination is what provides us the opportunity to create things that don't exist, to be able to have these creative leaps of awareness that we go, oh, if you've ever been trying to solve a problem in a kind of head-butting way, as is fairly common among us human beings, and then you let it go, and then something happens inside of us, that magical imagination goes, well, have you turned the problem this way and looked at it? That becomes heightened in journeying. I'm going to shuffle papers, so I'm just going to shut off my mic for a second.
No, I totally agree with everything you said, and there are so many things to unpack from, the powers to be want us to stay at this low level of vibration and not being able to communicate with each other because this is the way they can control us. And in Canada is as bad as in US and in Europe, and right now it's getting even worse because the government wants total control, and slowly but surely this is what they want. So a change has to take place everywhere in the world. And with my guests, we talk about the fall of the financial system, of governments and things like this, because they all have to pay the price for what they've done to us. In a legal way, to the judicial system, they have to pay the price because they just consider us serfs on their fiefdoms, and that's it. In terms of drumming, yes, I totally agree. And when I took my first course of shamanism with Hank Wesselman back in 2018, drumming was a very important component. And at the end of each session, we are journeying through a 15-minute drumming session, in fact. And also imagination, because I asked him a question and I said, you are asking us to imagine this and that, and what if we cannot? And then he asked me, can you imagine an apple or a rose? And I said, a red rose? He said, see, you can imagine a red rose. I didn't ask you about the color, but you're able to attach the color to the shape, to the form. So some people indeed cannot imagine a journey or imagine a secret garden. And it took me a while to go through that process and identify let's say, my power animal. Even now, I can, let's say, call on the higher self, but I don't see details. I see a shape. I don't know if it's good or bad, or if that will evolve later on, but this is what I can do now. So again, I agree with you. Imagination is powerful, and everything you said, it's pretty much on what we should go through if we take this path of shamanism.
Well, there's a piece I wanted to share with you. Is my partner, we work together, is not visual at all. When my partner journeys, they get body senses, like knowings. They get kind of trying to describe something that I don't experience, but it's there's awareness. There is a visceral kind of knowing, just that knowing is so part of the way they're wired, they understand it. And, some people get it auditorily. When I first was early in my training, there was a psychiatrist from upstate New York in the same program. And he says, I teach at-risk youth how to journey, and they all have these wonderful visions. I don't see anything, he says. He says, I hear my teacher's voice right under the drumming, but I can't tell anybody because I'm a psychiatrist. I can't tell anybody I hear voices. So I think if we find our own way, because we tend to go, there's only one right way, and Euro-colonial culture is really restrictive in that way. But there isn't. I mean, why would we have so much diversity in us as human beings if we didn't have that many capabilities?
Yes.
Nature doesn't waste time with things that don't work.
Yes, indeed. In your book, The Norse Shaman, you mention the shaman, I'm quoting right now, the shaman travels to better this world by negotiating with spirits, creating harmony, or finding information that is critical to supporting life. And my question is, what are potential instances when the shaman spirit might not return?
Well, if you don't return, you're not going to be fully enlivened here, and you will not be in good shape. So I highly recommend that you find your way back. The practitioners who really take to this as a method, and I don't say it's the only method in the world, it's just one I happen to practice, get adept at using their journey state as a place of rejuvenation, and they bring that rejuvenation back here. I think part of the difficulty we face is we're feeling that constriction in our culture, and it makes it really uncomfortable for many people to be here, particularly very sensitive people. And it makes people not want to be fully present in their body. But in my experience, that transition back is you not only understanding you got some information, but then you embody the information. And that embodying it also means it's changing your entire organism. Whenever we get an aha moment, you can't go back from that, right? It's like you've been changed. You have a new perception and you can't go backwards. And so that embodying of whatever wisdom you receive, sometimes it's just this other whole perspective on whatever it is you're dealing with. That embodiment, I think, is critical because, at our foundation, aren't we embodied spirits, right? If the spirit leaves, our physical life is done. So embodiment is so critical, I think, to everything that is expansive, because we can expand, but unless we embody it, we cannot use that here in the earth plane. And I think of us having this wonderful expansive spirit and the part of us that journeys, and it's wonderful. But we also have what I like to refer to in a really loving way as our animal body. And there are a whole suite of gifts that our animal body has that culture has tried to erase.
Yes.
Right? They've tried to educate it out of us. We have intuition, which gets boosted if you use the journey process. But that intuition that just tells you, no, I'm going to take that way home today. I don't know why, but it feels right. And you find out later, well, there was a huge accident on the highway, and it's a good thing you took the back road home. We have sensitivities to what's happening around us that we have learned to dismiss. Where is the data?
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
But we have that. And so as we embody what we get from our spirit excursions and bring that into our body, it also enhances the gifts that we already have wired into us. And I think we're more likely to use them because we've had that sense of interacting with the numinous, which is always sort of a really a magical experience. You're doing something that just feels like, whoa, no matter how long you've done it, you still go, whoa. And then you bring that magical feeling back. That reminds you that your view of your problems is a lot more flexible than we think it is. Your view of reality is a lot more flexible than we think it is. And there are solutions that we may not have thought of yet that can be present when we embody that new information.
Yes, and I also like to think that the spirit won't take the shaman away unless the shaman put everything in order in the community. He has someone to replace him, someone who was trained well, and he will serve the community while he's gone. Because spirit is wise, and he won't leave that community without a spiritual leader.
You're absolutely right. And what I go back and think of our deep ancestors when I think about shamanism and how they would use it. And I think how seemingly impossible it would be to have a small band of people, 30 people, right? You're traveling with elders, you're traveling with small children, you're on foot, and you're moving through changing landscapes. You're moving from one biozone to another where the plants are different, the animals are different. You have no idea. You don't have maps back then, right? You don't have a field guide to let you know what you're
just the stars.
Exactly. So how is it that they were able to do that? There's a thought, there's a wonderful PhD in the UK, and his name is going out of my head, but he has an idea, which I think is right on, that our ancestors were having transcendent experiences every night because they sat around a fire. And fire flickers at the same rate of journey drumming and the other repetitive stimulus that are available to us to put us in that shamanic state of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So imagine everybody's having those experiences in the group. There's also this sense, if you've ever been in a very dark place, which is hard to find today, with a fire, there is this sense of two worlds, the world that is illuminated in that incredible darkness that is beyond the fire. So there's this natural feeling of you've got two places, and that is more of a hidden world, at least at night, and you have the world that you're in. So everyone is being able to expand their awareness. So I don't think of it as altered consciousness so much as expanded awareness. And the ones that got good at remembering what they had experienced would have become the shaman in the same way that the one was really good at making cordage was making snares. And the one that got really good at knapping flint was making arrowheads and hand axes and whatever else they needed. So that idea that it arose naturally because we're wired to have those experiences, and then using that tool to decode what this mystery of what plants are okay for medicine, what plants are edible in this place, where are the herds that we know go past here at this time of year, but what place can we intersect with them? We learned that we were going to visit the caribou migration in northern Canada, and they had the company that had put that together had built lodges and everything on the route that they were expected to come, and they had been there year after year, and that year they went a completely different direction. So we wound up watching grizzlies that year. So if we were on foot and there were 30 of us and we're taking our elders and little children with us, we'd be in trouble because we had depended on that food source this particular time of year. So to have somebody who could look beyond the horizon, to perceive beyond what was right in front of them, to be able to talk to the plants, to be able to talk to the animals in that expanded state would have been key for survival.
Yes. Indeed. And what you said about the caribou leads into my next question. There's another paragraph which piqued my interest, and I'm quoting: "In order to come to terms with such catastrophes, it would have been important to believe that some form of universal order existed. How else could large-scale and chaos-producing events like wild swings in climate, earthquakes, tsunamis, and other cosmic events such as a comet or meteoric collisions be explained? These events would have to be part of a larger reality that lies beyond the vision of human beings and even that of the gods." So you talk about repeated events that took place at large intervals, but somehow humanity had recorded them. Do you think today's science spends enough time to study this historical proof and prepare us for similar events that might be upon us?
Probably not, honestly. Our ancestors were continually surprised by celestial events that happened at intervals beyond human memory. They would have, I think of the ones that lived at the end of the last ice age. As the ice retreated, it kind of did a cha-cha, a few steps forward, few steps back, and the climate would shift from forest to tundra and back and forth. And within the lifetime of one human being, and that, you only lived to be about 45 as an elder back then. So imagine your entire landscape changes roughly every 10 to 15 years. And that means all the species would shift. They'd change migration patterns. The plants would be different. I mean, it'd be like, one day you're in Churchill and the next day you're down in Toronto. It's impossible to think that our ancestors could manage that. But if they had that expanded view to it, or also elders who remembered what it was like the last time it shifted, the combination of those helped them to make it through. Could they predict the next one? Perhaps the shaman could. But even that ability to adapt, because they felt supported by the spirits that they interacted with in journeys, and also by the wisdom, the living encyclopedias that they brought with them, that would have some awareness. It's like the last time this happened, the herd moved further north. We'll have to move further north at this time. And for that, again, concrete problem solving, but using not just what's between your ears, using the awareness of the landscape, using that enhanced perception that you have in a shamanic journey or another kind of expansive experience. That is what we need to bring together here. We need to look at how can we approach the really catastrophic changes that we're experiencing because we didn't pay attention 50 years ago. How can we work with Mother Nature so that she can reorganize herself and take care of more of the species than just ourselves? That requires a much more expanded view than many people carry at this time. They carry I have to make sure I'm safe. They're building bunkers and, stockpiling food and what have you, which is one solution. But at some point, you're going to have to come out of there because you've run out of food. And you're going to have to figure out how to deal with what is. And as I teach my students that we have the capacity to interact with everything around us because it has a consciousness. So, we've had big storms. We the big storms that have been going on. They come up the Atlantic, and they've even had one in California. I said, you don't move them. That's not your job. They have a job to do. You don't move them, but you interact with them because they're like toddlers. They were born from nothing but cold air and hot air. and they have all this power like a 2-year-old has, and they can crash around like 2-year-olds can. Let them know that you're grateful for them mixing the air. Let them know that you're grateful for the rain. And also let them know that they are way too powerful for us down here. Ask them to lift their winds high above the land. Blow as hard as you want, but lift them high above all the trees, because I know you don't want anything to suffer. That's not your intent. And discharge your lightning from cloud to cloud, because that destroys things here that people and animals and everything depends upon. So I teach them to negotiate with this being that has all this power that it's never had before. It was never born before that particular storm. And think of it as this entity that is doing what it's meant to do and has no idea how powerful it is. In the same way, toddlers can be incredibly destructive beings.
Yes, and when you mentioned storm, you mentioned water. And I wrote extensively about the awakening of water and this storm coming out of nowhere just to punish certain individuals, and then they will vanish after the punishment was applied. So in the old Norse, the Norns, Norns, were protectors of body of waters. Why was water so important to be protected by spirits?
I think the nature of water, not only that, we need to have water. We can only live, 3 days or so without water. There is something in that mercurial form and yet no form quality that it has. I think there's something really magical, even for ordinary people. And it has the capacity to be mist. It has the capacity to be liquid. It has the capacity to be frozen rock solid like ice. And yet it's this fundamental thing that we all need. I think it's connected also, at least in our ancestors' minds, to birth and rebirth. People gave birth in front of their family, and they understood that gush of water was signaling that a life was coming into the world. So I think those kind of things get put together in our minds when we experience them. We tend to experience, in fact, it's quite literal that you can experience life with goggles on like this, where it's all virtual reality. And when you have an embodied experience of living, where you are close to the land, you're close to the animals, you're close to the birds, you're close to the elements, you have a different perspective. I've been very blessed to be, surprisingly enough, around a lot of wild creatures. And what I see in wild creatures reminds me how not special we are. I have seen acts of altruism in bear cubs, for instance. This is a story I tell a lot. I'm standing on one side of the river and watching grizzly bears, and there's nobody I can see at this point, but I can see the shrubbery moving over there. So I know there's probably a bear over there. So at some point, this great big female grizzly coming out to the beach, and she's just continuing doing what she's doing, walking down the beach. But the branches are still wiggling, and it's like, so out pops eventually a cub. And the cub pops out and can see its mom traveling down the beach, and then looks back, because I can still see that the shrubbery is moving. And this bear looked at their mother, looked back at the woods, looked at their mother, and then sat down. And that cub waited for its sibling. And at this point, the mother had gone around the bend where she was no longer visible, sat and waited for that sibling. And then they both went off to follow their mom, and they scampered down the beach. Now, if we think of that from a scientific biological standpoint, it would have been far more efficacious for the first cub to tear off after its mother. And it's like, hey, I'm going to survive. I'm sticking with mom. But instead, it did this remarkable thing that we tend to think is a very human trait, of, no, I want to wait for my sibling because otherwise he won't know where to go or she won't know where to go. And we'll go together.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
it's an extraordinary thing. And I've had other examples like that. I had a hummingbird crashed into, I worked in an office building for a while on the second floor. And every autumn and every spring, something would run into the windows. And I knew small birds, if they haven't fallen too far or hit too hard, usually if you hold them in your hands and keep them from going into shock, they'll be okay. So we were with a client at that point, and I said that, oh, we'll have to go down after the session. And the client says, well, let's go now. So we run downstairs and I look, and I don't know what it is at this point because it's kind of upside down and on the part of the air conditioning system downstairs. So I just kind of pick it up gently, put it in my hand, and we walk over. There were some benches that we could sit on. And I can feel its little heartbeat thumping away in there. And at one point I peek, and it's a hummingbird. So I open my hand and touch its toes because they can only perch or fly. They can't walk. So I touched her toes, and she sits on my finger. Now, a wild animal doesn't want to do this generally. So it's sitting on my finger, and it's doing this. Does this wing work? Yeah, that works. Is this wing? Oh, yeah, that's okay. And she sat there and stayed with us for probably 10, 15 minutes. After she had checked everything out, she was just, oh, this is okay. I'll hang out here. And it wasn't until some guys that came out for a smoke break and their smoke preceded them that she looked at the three of us, and then she off into the woods. Now, that's a very unusual encounter by anybody's stretch of the imagination, but animals have that. They have an intuition that I've never sat on someone's finger before, but I feel safe. It's okay. In a way that we don't access as easily.
Yeah, so it's beautiful that you told us this story, and the connection with animals, with plants, and how beneficial that connection can be for us. But now let's look at the reversal side of our lives, when right now they are trying to put us into the 15 minutes cities and not being able to go outside. I even had the experience of the local government, local municipality, putting up signs for no parking close to a forest. So there are only 5 available parking spots. And if you will park somewhere else, you get a fine. And it's like they were forbidding you to walk into a public place by not allowing you to park. So what do you think it will do to our psyche, to our humanity, especially after 3 years of lockdowns and masking and all kind of fear that it was induced into the human consciousness?
What I know is some people will always conform, and there are always those that go, mm-mm. And both of them are for safety. It's so interesting. We have those, if you think about progressives versus reactionaries, they're both doing what they feel is the direction of safety. And someone who wants a more spacious area to move around in thinks that's the safer opportunity, right? Which I happen to agree with. And we have the exact opposite, where people are surrendering themselves to either a religious dogma or the way the government wants you to be, and they're going into the smallest, safest box that they could possibly find. And if somebody just tells me what to do, it's going to be okay. And those two don't fit at all.
Yeah.
But what I know is the boxes over history have not served us. They have never really served us. And that sense of expansion, of creativity, of imagination, of bringing forth new ideas new possibilities is how we've made it this far.
Yes.
You know, we're what, a species of what, maybe 2 million, 2 million years, you know, not very many million years compared to our deeper ancestors. And there are so many more people that refuse to surrender their imagination, their possibilities to an organization, some kind of structure that says, no, you can't do that. And I don't mean in a criminal way. I mean but have you thought about this? What about you know, if we are medicating, you know, the other thing is medicating people so that they're not able to be as open-minded and non-linear as they were wired to be. You know, we sort of want to medicate our visionaries because
Yes.
they seem disruptive to the people in power. But that's where innovation comes from. That's where we're going to find the solutions for the problems we have, not locking us into some structure. You know, what is it? You probably know right off the top of your head. I can't use the right word for it, but it's a UN directive, something 21. I can't think of it. About basically finding ways to reduce population and things by the state, right?
You mean event? No, okay, not event 01. Okay, something else. Law done by.
I can't think of it anyway. The idea of we're going to just make everything smaller is not going to work. It's the antithesis of nature. And if we don't work in the way that nature works, I think we're in trouble. Nature is always looking for a new solution. She mutates within the organisms to adjust. Now, we're changing the planet faster than she can produce those mutations. But if we think like nature, if we allow ourselves to think and behave like nature behaves, looking for, not saying, oh, we can't do that, instead of, let's find a way to do that. Because if if we leave a lot, piece of property vacant, nature moves in. She just moves in and she plants whatever she wants to plant there, and the birds come in and the animals come in, and it happens. We have a small plot of land in a small suburban village in Maine, and there's a flood channel that runs across our property to the river. And behind that is a railroad track. So in that area, we decided to let it go wild 30 years ago. Like, let's leave it to the critters. It's less than an acre. Our whole property is less than an acre. We have so much life in that that is supported by that tiny little place, that it has encouraged our neighbors. Our neighbors have a trail cam set up at their suburban house next door. And they came over and said, did you know you had a moose walk up your driveway? Well, no, we've seen the deer, but we haven't seen the moose yet. So that simple act of letting nature do its thing and let her incredible intelligence that has created all this magnificence around us, let's see what she can do with that. Let's give her the space to do that and give ourselves the space to allow our own evolution. It means tossing off any description we have of ourselves and allowing ourselves to become somebody else, to have new gifts burble up inside of us that we didn't know we had, to have new awarenesses come forth. That is the way nature works.
Yes.
And working against nature is what's got us here into this mess. Why don't we try something else? Let's work with it.
And in fact, I had a similar experiment this year with my garden. It's a small garden, a patch of land for growing vegetables. So I planted, zucchinis and tomatoes and cucumbers and other vegetables. And at one point, I stopped plucking out the weeds. I said, forget about it. Let's see what's going to happen. The fruits were there, they're formed. And I saw mugwort, which I didn't plant. I saw other colorful weeds. I said it's good for the bumblebees and for the bees. I left everything there, and it's beautiful colors, a lot of insects. I also do electroculture, so maybe that attracted the bees and the other type of plants as well. But it's an interesting experiment, and I'm going to try it next year as well.
And some cities are really being intelligent about allowing people to take over plots of land. There's wonderful things that happened in Detroit, for instance, where when the car companies left, they just left the city in ruins in a lot of ways, and particularly the places where people lived. And so houses wound up getting bulldozed, and there would be lots of empty space. And the people decided, well, we're poor, so we don't have a supermarket. We're in a food desert. Let's grow food. And so there are all these urban farms in the Detroit area, and they're raising bees. They're having all this bounty that was never present when the industry that was supposed to take care of them was present. Nature finds a way to take care of them with, so plenty of work on their part to make sure that the earth is tilled and they've planted seeds. But when they work with the natural world, any of us work with the natural world, there are harvests, tangible and intangible, that come from it.
Yes, I had some potatoes, unexpected sunflower. So it was beautiful. Evelyn, I want to ask you about, again, in your book, you talk about burial sites in which women of shamanic status were uncovered. The objects found beside them gave away such a clue. I'm wondering if any of the anthropologists or archaeologists who established the social status of the women invited any modern day shamans to energetically and spiritually investigate the sites.
Not so far as I know. You'd think that would be logical, wouldn't you? But no, as far as I know, that didn't happen. But the people of the northern part of Siberia, particularly the Tungus-speaking people and the Aven, those people, they have a story that is part of their mythos, their foundational stories that are part of their culture. That's a better way to say it. And they believe in a first shaman, that this mythical being that had this capability then taught other people how to do what she did. And I find that to be fascinating, that got passed down as truth. And so among the traditional shamans of that area, whether they still practice in that same way now, I'm not sure, they would dress with some women's garments. They would have a traveling cap. They would have an apron. Some of them would wear something that looked like a skirt. Even the Manchu shamans in China would do the same thing. And so they were responding to this earlier shaman that taught the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I'm a firm believer that in indigenous cultures, and once upon a time, even Europeans were indigenous, but it's a long time ago, and we've lost a lot of that wisdom. Indigenous cultures who have an intact culture, their stories are not just stories. Their stories are their encyclopedia, their almanac, their genealogy is also encoded into them quite often. And we need to look at those stories, not with it's a myth, that dismissive Eurocolonial stuff that we do, to look at those as truth being told as a story so that it is remembered. Because you as a fiction writer, that stories stick. They stick. It's like they have Velcro on them. They stick with us. A narrative might not, but a story sticks. And how wise our ancestors were, because I think all of our ancestors were storytellers. They had to have been, to preserve knowledge from one generation to the next. How else, if you're in a non-literate culture, you have to be able to preserve wisdom in some form. And so people learned stories accurately because it was important to carry that wisdom to the next generation. There's a wonderful movie version of Fahrenheit 451 that was made in the early 60s. And I'm sure they've remade it several times since then. There's these wonderful scenes later on in the book where the fireman who had, couldn't burn books anymore, he ran off. And he met with these people who were in the process of becoming books. They had taken a book that they loved so much, and books were illegal. They had taken a book, they lived in the wild, and they chose to memorize that book, every single word, so that they became a book.
Yes.
That they could tell to other people. And that got me really viscerally, even thinking about it now, it's moving to me that the stories that we hold that are true, that are teaching stories, that are teaching in a positive way and teaching of it, don't do this thing that I've done. It wasn't a good idea. It didn't turn out well. Those stories are what we remember. I'm blessed to have had a lot of storytellers in my childhood. I was the firstborn grandchild, great-grandchild, and all of these gray-haired people were around me all the time, and they were brilliant storytellers. And those stories still stick with me because I could be in that story and not just have my head memory receive it, but my body received it, my emotional body received it, and they stayed with me. So that tells me two things. One is the importance of story for preserving culture. It's also important for possibility. Because when you hear a story and hear even a small bit of heroism in it, like I went through this thing and this is how it turned out, and this part was hard, but I figured it out and I did this. You hear in that a possibility for you to move something in your life, maybe very different than what your great-grandmother would have dealt with, but that idea that such a thing is possible. Such a thing when you feel like something's right up against your nose and you can't figure out a way around it. That story that elder taught you reminds you, all right, there is some way that I just haven't found yet. So it instills hope. It triggers the part of us that is not now shut down in fear, but the part of us that's wondering, well, how could I solve that problem? What needs to happen for that to flow in a different way? It excites the imagination. So it tells me also that we must never tell stories to ourselves that aren't true.
Yes.
We should never tell stories that diminish ourselves or the children that are around us. Because then we are shrinking possibility.
Mm-hmm.
When I appreciate people who write fiction that opens people's possibility. They're exposed to a completely different world with completely different rules. It allows them to go, well, that worked in that story. I wonder if we could try something like that. What if we throw away the old way of doing it and try doing it completely differently? Speculative fiction in particular, I think, is very important in our culture because we don't have the same kind of storytellers that previous generations had. Now we have people that tell stories in books.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the feeling the story through your body, because I just wrote a story for an anthology. It's called Knowledge Keepers. And there are selected individuals, children, which are getting signs on their bodies about the history of humanity. And they touch the embossed skin, and they get the feeling, and they get the story based on touching only and they tell the story to their community, and then they go outside the community and tell these stories to others. And the question was, but yes, if we are not there to tell the story over and over, and others will tell our story, they will distort the story. And the morale is, doesn't matter if they distort the story, it will be a cycle. The story will come full circle, and it will still be true if people believe in that, even if they change it a little bit here and there. So I just wrote this story recently.
We seem to be in perfect sync today.
Yeah, thank you very much for everything you said. And something else from your book, which touches on quantum physics realm, if I'm not mistaken, is the Norse. You said the Norse describe two powerful forces that define and shape our existence. These are Orlog and Weird, if I pronounce them correctly. So are they bounding the quantum physics concept?
You know, I think they are. Again, our ancestors understood that things happen that we don't know how they happened. And they come up with a way to tell that story. And to me, you know, we live in a time when science is becoming so metaphysical. It's extraordinary. Quantum physics in particular, the idea that photons, you know, which have no mass, they're particles of light, even though they're really a wave. You know, it's the kind of thing that makes your head hurt. They come together in a certain way and pop an electron into existence, which has mass. And then that same electron can decide to pop back out and become photons. Like that's a really cool magic trick. And if such a thing is possible on that small scale, we know in watching nature that she replicates patterns all the time. That, you know, if you think about a spiral pattern, it's replicated in a tiny way all the way up to the pattern of branches on a tree, the most enormous tree you can imagine. So she replicates these patterns. The idea that something could be here and then not here. So that, to me, sparks a kind of imagination that I think our ancestors were trying to also stimulate in us. That it's not just what you see that matters. There's something behind the scenes that, you know, the Norse referred to as gods and goddesses, and many cultures have. We're trying to explain to ourselves that there's something beyond us that we don't fully understand. But when we create deities, we sometimes even box it in because a deity has a particular, you know, a particular attribute.
Yes.
And yet, when we at least have that idea that there is something beyond us that is capable of things that we are not, if we boil it down like that, don't give it a face. We don't have to give it a face, but just holding that inside of us, that we are in the presence of more than we can see, hear, taste, and touch.
Yes.
And that presence around us is intelligent, which is why we make them look like us and when we create deities. And that intelligence is something that we can interact with, even when we're not always sure how. So dreams would be something that we access some of that vision of what's happening beyond our senses. Shamanic journeys are what we can intend to go to receive something from beyond our senses. There's a lot of ways, a real deep meditation. We can stretch into that place beyond our senses. And so we use different words and we come up with different constructs to remind ourselves that there's more than what we can experience with our senses. And rather than thinking of it as something we're at the effect of, when we take it into ourselves and think, oh, we could be in relationship with that in some way. So that's where gods that look like us come from, I think. It's like, oh, I can be in relationship with this being. But if we hold just that, not give it a face, not give it anything, but recognize that there is this entire intelligent universe around us that is constantly creating and recreating itself in all different forms. Some of them human, some of them are planetary, some of them are stars, whatever. It's constantly creating. It can't help itself. So why would we think that our small view and the path that we have put ourselves on is the only way? Why would we think that? That's a kind of social construct that is akin to madness when we think about that bigger possibility of which we are a part. It's exciting, for me to think in that way. I'm not frightened by that enormity of which I'm a part. I'm excited by it. I know sometime in the future, when I'm no longer in a form, I'll be really enjoying it in a completely different way. But to have the physical experience of it at the same time is really pretty amazing.
Yes, I agree. And I think this is a perfect time to let ourselves go wild on the spiritual side, if I can say so, and, surrender to the whole consciousness, which you said is changing every moment and it creates every moment. And I know also that the way you want to leave something behind after you ascend to a different form is through Spirit Passages Academy and the New Humans, New Earth Summit initiatives. Can you please expand a little bit on these two?
In a nutshell, I would say that we need to evolve as a collective, but it's pretty impossible to address the entire collective. But each individual who makes evolutionary steps within themselves, whatever they might be, nurturing that is a way to infect the collective with seeds of evolution. And to me, because we're hardwired as a collective, as individuals shift in whatever way we have found our pathway, as we shift to this higher vibration, more expanded awareness, a different perception of our relationship with the natural world, we are, in the best sense of the word, like freedom fighters in a way. I'm thinking of those people that battled in Europe during the time of the Nazis. That we are not fighting against in the same way, but we are simply bringing space when the other forces want to trap us in. We're just, nope, not allowing that. If you can restrain my body, you can't restrain this. You can't restrain my imagination. You can't restrain my intuition. You can't restrain my creativity. You can keep me from parking close to the woods, but you can't keep me from nature because I'm part of nature. Nature will receive me wherever I am. And so your plan is folly. So as we support people in the academy to learn a different way for themselves, if it's a piece of healing that needs to happen for them to have a wider vision, whatever it might be, that's my passion, my partner's passion, and the wonderful production manager we've hired who's equally as passionate. It's about supporting people to make whatever shift they're capable of making now. And in that, recognize it's not selfish that they're just working on themselves. They are agents of change simply by their being. And yes, we need as many of those as we can possibly get.
Yes, thank you very much. And these are amazing words for finishing the interview, but I'm still going to ask the question, do you have any final words?
I'm actually going to give you the words that was written in my yearbook by an English teacher. She just wrote a couple of words, but I think they're powerful words. Stay amazed.
Beautiful. Evelyn, thank you very much for your time, for everything you share with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Share it, like it. Don't forget that Spiritual Inspired Inspired.ca is a standalone website now. We just joined Conscious Awareness Network. You can find us on Roku, Apple TV, and other independent platforms. And until next time, love and gratitude.